So those of you who've perhaps had a look at developments in the US in terms of digital agricultural platforms may be familiar with the developments that are occurring in the corn industry in particular, and the level of sophistication of some of those. And I think it's probably fair to say that among the leading companies that are at the forefront of a lot of those developments is Climate Corporation. It's not the only one, but they're certainly at a fairly leading edge. Climate Corporation is owned by Monsanto. It was taken over by Monsanto a few years ago, and has done a lot of work in developing up digital agricultural platforms used by both advisors and farmers right across the Corn Belt. And so our dinner speaker this evening is the lead quantitative researcher for agronomic modelling with the Climate Corporation, and that's Dr. David Clifford. The particular point to note about David is that he cut his teeth here with the CSIRO. So he's an Australian originally in terms of his research background, but now with the Climate Corp based in San Francisco. He leads the seeding and planting team, which does statistical research to help growers improve the agronomic outcomes of their businesses through decisions taken early in the growing season relating to management zones, hybrid choices and seeding populations. Prior to joining the Climate Corporation in 2015, David was at the CSIRO for 10 years, where he worked on statistical models for soil properties, the design of large-scale sampling in remote areas, as well as collaborating in other areas of applied research, including genetics and medicine. So I think you'll find David's discussion about digital agriculture and where it's heading, and particularly the Climate Corporation's direction, quite fascinating, and please welcome him to the stage.
Okay, thank you everyone. I've really enjoyed the conference so far today, and one of the things that has really struck me is that digital agriculture is really about pattern matching. And I wonder if, with all the expertise in the room here, people picked up on the patterns in the different talks we saw from various different speakers today. There was a lot of reinforcement of some key messages. And as I was enjoying the talks and thinking about the material presented, there was this growing sense of dread in the back of my mind when people talked about the motivation of the increasing population in the world and the need for digital agriculture, how everything in agriculture is being digitized, and how changes in computer technology and computation were driving data science. And this dread was growing in the back of my mind, because I was like, oh, I was going to say that. And I was going to say that as well. And then, you know, different talks looked at the history of different aspects of agriculture here in Australia, and I'm going to do something similar, and there was even a live demo, and I'll do a little bit of that. And the dread was building. I was wondering, oh my God, is there going to be anything left in my talk that hasn't actually been mentioned already? And I guess I reached peak dread when the one joke I had planned about the madness of having a statistician give the final talk of the evening was stolen by the bloody banker. So anyway, at that point I started to realize actually that the unique value that, or the unique perspective I'm bringing tonight on digital agriculture is the fact that I'm a statistician. It's the fact that I'm leading a data science team at the Climate Corporation, and our approach is, well, the approach of statistics is very important to what happens in digital agriculture. People talked a lot about data and data quality. People talked about the need for domain science, and I could not agree more. But the third really important ingredient in digital agriculture is the data science and the statistics, and capturing you know, the value in the domain science and the data in a single model in a coherent way. So we've identified the pattern. Let's continue with the pattern, and I'll give my talk, and hopefully you get some value from what I'm presenting this evening. So I'd like to give an overview of the history of the Climate Corporation, because I think the process climate has gone through and the change it has gone through in the 10 years it has been in existence is going to be very informative to not only highlight the pace of change and the manner of the change, but also what's likely to happen in the future as well. WeatherBill, as it was founded in 2006 by 2 Google engineers, and they had a relatively small weather data set that they used to basically predict extreme weather events and offer on a website, a very basic website, an insurance product. You could put in the details of a weather event that you were concerned about. You don't want your wedding next weekend to be rained out, or you're at a ski resort and you want to make sure that you have sufficient snow for the season or early enough in the season. And if you can put a dollar value on what impact that will have on your business, you can put those details in and get a quote for an insurance for that event. And by all accounts, it was a profitable startup organization when it was first founded. And one of the features of WeatherBill was when you purchased some insurance from them, you had access to a lot of weather data for that location where you bought the insurance. And when the particular weather event occurred, or if it occurred, that you had insured against, you would just automatically get a check in the post at the end of the season, or instantly actually, not at the end of the season. And everything was going great. And then they started to notice that they were selling a lot of really cheap insurance in the Midwest. And they looked into it a little bit further, and they realized growers were buying cheap insurance just to get access to the weather information on the back end. And so that prompted a pivot in the organization. It switched to an exclusive agriculture focus in 2009 as an insurance company. It switched to become the Climate Corporation in 2011. And then in the lead up to getting acquired by Monsanto, it really started focusing on the agronomic services that it was offering to growers. It had a Climate Basic and a Climate Pro app. Monsanto kicked off huge investment in ag technology when it purchased the Climate Corporation for close to $1 billion nearly 3 years ago now. And today, the Climate Corporation is the data science-driven ag technology platform in the US. And my story with the Climate Corporation started about 1.5 years ago, about a year after they were acquired by Monsanto. And the pace of change represented in this graphic here has continued since I've joined. When I joined, we were still an insurance company, and we are no longer an insurance company today. When I joined, we had precision planting as part of the Climate Corporation. We had a whole manufacturing arm, and that is now gone also. And so the pace of change and the focus of the work, I think, is really indicative of what could possibly come in the future as well in this space. So it's a very interesting place to be working, and it's been a very enjoyable period for myself as well. And our vision as an organization is of a world, a digitized world, where every farmer is able to optimize and flawlessly execute every decision on the farm. And this is a utopian vision, of course. It's not going to happen next year or the year after. It's going to happen at some point in the future, perhaps. And as we work towards this vision, our mission in the Climate Corporation is to help all of the world's growers to sustainably increase the productivity of their operations through the use of digital tools. And while it's all of the world's growers in our mission, we're certainly focused on a very select set of growers at the moment in the US, growers of corn and growers of soybeans predominantly. To achieve our mission, we have released a digital agricultural platform called Climate Field View, and there's a few different variations of it in the market today. There's the Prime version, which is a free platform to give insight into the weather at the farm, at the field scale, across the Midwest, across the whole country, in fact. The Plus version is what you get if you have one of these units here, which is a Field View Drive. It's a little 9-pin plug. It plugs into your equipment on the farm, and as you're driving around the farm, it captures all of the information that your equipment is reading and makes it visible to you in an iPad in the cab as you're driving around the field, and you can get insight into the performance of different products in real time. And then the Climate Field View Pro version is our top of the tier offering, and this gives insight into seeds and planting, which is the part of climate's research that I'm involved with. We have a fertility offering called Nitrogen Advisor, and then the Field Insights as well, which is our remote sensed imagery product called Field Health Advisor. And all of these products sit on top of a foundation of cloud-based data acquisition and storage. And so these are things like the weather information that we can get from various different sources, the corpus of remote sensed imagery that covers this part of the US, the very rich field data and research data that we can gather through research farms that we own and rent. We can run very detailed experiments on particular aspects of a particular model just to understand one of these parameters that might be driving nitrogen uptake by plants, for example. We have a lot of germplasm data from the breeding trials that Monsanto runs, and then of course underpinning all of this as well is the grower data that we try to incentivize growers to put into our system so that they can get more out of the system by tailoring it to their particular environment. And on top of that foundation is the data science and the software engineering, and there's a huge, huge effort of work to make all of this connected and seamless for the grower's experience. And the data science side is where I'm working. Grower data is extremely important, but no grower wants to faff about with trying to get the data into the system, right? So we have to make it very easy for a grower to get their data into our system if we want to make sure that they put it in. So we have systems like the FieldView Drive. If you have particular equipment like precision planting equipment, it will flow seamlessly into our cloud for you. And then coming soon, based on a recent deal we've done with John Deere, we will be the only digital agriculture platform that will have that in-cab access to the John Deere information in the Climate FieldView platform. If your data is in another cloud, we put a lot of effort into making it very easy to transfer the data cloud to cloud. So you just give us that permission, we will go and get it for you and bring it into our system. And then if you really do have your information on a USB stick, we have manual upload functionality as well. The issue of data and data privacy came up several times today, and we have a very clear and consistent approach to data privacy at the Climate Corporation. And it's as follows. The growers own the data that is provided to us. We are holding it on their behalf, but we do not own it. It's grower data. And they can delete that information at any point upon request, and we will always ask the grower for consent if we're going to do anything with the data outside of what is agreed in our data policy. Data privacy is your right, and it's our responsibility, and it's something we take very seriously. So I'll try and do a demo of the product just to give you an idea of what it is like at the moment. People talked about the sausage and the sizzle, and I think there's a lot of mystery about what actually is in Climate. And the best way to show you is just to do a demo. And so when you log into the Climate platform, this is what you see. You see a map of the region where your farm is, and this particular account has got fields all over the country, which is a bit unrealistic, but you have all your fields listed here on the left-hand side. You look at a particular field, you see how many growing degree units have happened so far in the season, what's the wind doing at the moment, what's the chance of rain in the next 24 hours, how much rain fell in the previous 24 hours. So you just give them a brief snapshot of what's going on in that particular field, and that can be very informative to growers. Overlaid on the map here above all of the locations is a radar map just to show where the rainfall is happening at the moment. You switch to the data manager view for the tool, and you see a very data-centric view of your fields that are in our system. And again, you have all of your fields listed on the left-hand side. You have information that dictates the nitrogen programs you have in place in each field. You can put in information about your planting plans, your information about the management practices and the soil characteristics there. And we will pre-populate as much of this information as we can from publicly available sources. And again, you can scroll down through all of your different fields, and the nitrogen advisor summary information is given here on the right-hand side. That's basically saying when it's green, you're going to have sufficient nitrogen in this particular field given the management you have put in place this year. And then you might see one like this field here where it's dark red, 57 pounds of nitrogen per acre deficit by the end of the season. So you can click on this, look into more detail for this particular field, what's going on in this field, and try and understand have you done something wrong when you're managing it, or what's happening. And in this particular field, the grower had a nitrogen application of 120 pounds of nitrogen in November. And what typically happens in the US is after you've harvested your crop, and you do that as late as possible in the season, you put nitrogen out into the system, it freezes over for the winter period. The nitrogen sits in the soil, and then as soon as winter breaks, you want to get out into the field as early as possible and plant so that you can make the most of the season. And that's why people put fertilizer out before the winter. And what has happened for this particular field is all the nitrogen seems to have disappeared from the system in this particular location over the course of the winter. And it's not clear what's going on, and we'll come back to this point later, but in here you put in the planting information happens in April. There's a side dress of 100 pounds of nitrogen in May, and with this deficit perhaps you have another opportunity before the corn gets too high of putting more nitrogen out. And with this tool you can investigate what would happen if you put more nitrogen out. So we're going to put ammonium sulfate, we're going to broadcast it to be incorporated within a day. There's an uncertainty bound here between 40 and 75 pounds per acre deficit, so I'm going to put in 80, say, and I'm going to do that, let's say, next week. And this is running live. This is not pre-run, and within a couple of seconds, the grower will get that feedback for what the model is saying in terms of how much nitrogen would be available if he did take that opportunity to get back out into the field. Over here on the left-hand side, there's a few other summary pieces of information about this particular field on the target yield the grower is trying to achieve here, on the different types of soil in the field, what the planting information was, and so forth. And the grower can go in and edit and change all of this information if he's got better information on the soils, for example, for this particular field. And you can see it has completed running in a couple of seconds, and with this second side dress of nitrogen, we're going to have 4 pounds at the end of the season, which is good. Having this kind of interactivity in the tool is extremely important for building trust with the grower. Okay? He can go in here and say, you know what, this field, it doesn't have silty loam soil, it's got the worst type of clay. And he can make that change to see what impact it has on the nitrogen dynamics over the course of the season, because he can use the answer he gets from the model to compare, and he can compare that with his agronomic insight. And if those things match, that is a way for him to build trust in what we're doing. If they don't match, he might dismiss it, right? But giving him the opportunity to interrogate the system a little bit will give him a little look under the hood and build trust with what we're doing. So that's the live demo, and since it worked, I'll skip a couple of slides. There's a few parts of the system that are difficult to demo in a live setting, and one of them is the script creator tool. This is the part of the tool that my team is doing work on at the moment. And what is available to growers right now is a fully manual approach to creating a script for a particular field. And when I say script, I'm talking about a variable rate script for a field. And what we have in product right now is, by default, the Surgo zones, the soil map that is available in the US, shown over the fields here. And what the grower can do is he can click on a particular zone and assign a seeding rate to it, and then go to the next zone and assign a seeding rate there, and manually basically set up this variable rate script that he wishes to implement. If he doesn't like the Surgo zones, he can completely write his own zones from scratch using the mouse on the web. That is kind of the state of the art for script creation in digital platforms in the US at the moment. Where script creation is going in the future is a little bit more sophisticated, and there's a little more automation in some of these steps. So what I'm showing you here on the top row are 3 yield maps for a particular field. Red is low yielding parts of the field, green is very high yielding parts of the field. And what's interesting is that there are certain parts of the field that are consistently low yielding. And there are other parts of the field where the performance might be low in one year and very high in other years. And you can use this information to basically pick out zones in the field that are behaving within the zone in a consistent manner, but compared to neighboring zones in a different manner. And the grower can use this information to manage the field separately, based on these zones as opposed to soil-based zones. It's not easy to ascribe a reason sometimes to why the behavior happens, but sometimes it is possible. So in some fields where you have topography, a significant topography, you'll have ponding issues when you have very wet years. And when that happens, you will have a drop in yield in that part of the field because of the damage to the crop. Likewise, in very dry years, the same part of the field might be the only part of the field that has sufficient moisture, and so you'll get that high-yielding corner performance in those very dry years, and that will drive that changing behavior from low to high and back. Ultimately, we can give any sets of zones to a grower. Ultimately, the grower is the person who knows their field the best. It's about giving them a good starting point, and then they can go and edit the zones themselves. They can change the boundaries. They can merge things together. And again, all of that functionality helps gain the trust of the grower, and it gives them some skin in the game when they have finally implemented a script in their field. They have taken ownership of what they're doing. It's not just a black box, this is what you should implement, don't change it, right? It's definitely not like that. The other part of the product is the Field Health Advisor, and we're very early in the season in the US at the moment. There is no imagery live for this season, so I can't run the demo. But there are remote sensed imagery captured over the course of the season, and we can present that information to the grower in a number of ways. On the left, we have what's called the vegetation map, and the color scheme here is chosen to have a consistent meaning over the course of the season. So the color of green has the same meaning in early July as it would have in late August. And when you look at the lower panel here, you can see the changes in this particular field over the course of the season as imagery becomes available. You can present exactly the same information to the grower on a different color scale to really pull out where are the high-performing parts of the field and where are the poor-performing parts of the field. And the idea is, if there's a pattern that looks suspect to the grower in that poor performance, perhaps there's something he can do about it, or it might prompt him to get out into the field to investigate it further. This circular field is obviously a irrigated field, a central pivot field, and here are 3 images over the course of a season from 2014. And when you see the final image, it's quite clear what's happening. There's a clogged nozzle in this central pivot. And even in that first image in June, you can see some circular features in that middle band of the field there. This particular grower didn't pick that out. Maybe it's just obvious in hindsight when you can see that final image. It's a little bit more obvious in the central image, but there's some cloud contamination, which is always a problem. But this field is far away from where he was based. He didn't go and scout it. And then by the end of the season, he lost 20 bushels per acre, over a third of the field at the time of harvest. And that's a significant loss when the average yield in the US is about 170 bushels per acre for corn. So it's over 10%. So these are the kinds of agronomic insights growers can gain today from the product that we have in place in the US. So to switch tack a little bit now, let's talk about the research that we do and the way we do research at the Climate Corporation. And I hinted at this at the start. We build a lot of models for many different things for growers, and there are 3 key components in any model. There's the data that goes into it, there's the domain science, and there's the data science. And you need all 3 of them to build a good model. Now, if you give a statistician all the data in the world and you send him off and see what he can come up with, he will give you a fantastic model for that particular data set, but it's going to lack the agronomic insights that are necessary to make it actually meaningful to the grower. There's a classic example of a company that had all of this machine data from combines, and they had the yield data, and they fitted a regression model between one and the other, and they saw that when the combine is driving fast, you get higher yield. So clearly, drive the combine faster, you get more yield, right? There's a correlation between the two, but it's not a causal relationship, and so you can miss even the basic things like that if you ignore the domain science. Likewise, you give a domain scientist all the data in the world, and perhaps he has access to some open source data mining software, for example. But that he or she may not fully characterize the uncertainty associated with the data in that model. They might not fit the model optimally. They might be making some mistakes, I guess, with how they do that modeling. And again, it's not the ideal situation. You really need all 3 to build a successful model. George Box is a famous statistician, often misquoted as saying, all models are wrong, but some models are useful. I think this is the actual quote he had. And it's really worth bearing in mind. There is no shortage to the complexity you can put into a model, but at the end of the day, you have to stop somewhere, and it has to be scalable and it has to be computable. And you want to capture the major effects that matter to a grower and then push all the rest into an uncertainty term that you just have to say, okay, I can't go that last step. And we keep this in mind with all of the modeling that we do, because it's very important that what we put into place is scalable. Data is, of the three, I guess data is probably the most important of the three, let's be honest. You need data to build the models, and we consume as much information as we can for the crops that we're interested in, and for weather and imagery and so forth. So this is the number of observations we consume each year just for corn alone. So there's 14 billion observations from yield monitor data, 260 billion observations for remote sense data, and 20 billion observations for weather. And these are three good examples to consider, because they highlight three different aspects of data. So you've got purely spatial information like yield data, you've got very structured spatio-temporal data like weather information, and then you've got remote sensed imagery, which is sort of in between. There is a spatial component to each image, but they don't come on at a fixed cadence through the season because of the vagaries of cloud cover and so forth. So it's kind of a complex spatio-temporal model, spatio-temporal data set. And data quality is a big deal, right? We trust our data, we have to trust our data, but we have to spend a lot of effort checking it, and verifying it, and making sure it's up to scratch. Here's an example from one of the weather products that we use. It's from the European Medium Range Weather Forecast. And we had a weather station in a location where we could test what the model was predicting and forecasting for temperature in that location. And when you compared that 1 day ahead minimum forecast with the actual observation of the temperature and looked at the difference between the two, what we found was a bias in what that model was forecasting. And not only was it biased, but that bias was varying smoothly through time. So there's a very strong seasonal component to the bias, and it's 2 or 3 degrees, which can be crucial in early or late season. And through this exploratory data analysis process, you can identify biases like these. And this wouldn't mean you would throw it out. This would mean you can improve upon the product itself. And you can go through a process of statistical calibration of that 1 day ahead forecast based on the most recent forecasts and the most recent observations. And you see how off was I yesterday and today and the day before, and then adjust that 1 day ahead forecast accordingly. You can get rid of the bias, and you can actually reduce the uncertainty around the forecast, and ultimately improve the product that you're using prior to using it. Nitrogen is the major, our Nitrogen Advisor product is the major component to the offering that we give growers at the moment. And nitrogen is a very challenging system to model in the US in corn. Each of these arrows here represents a biogeochemical process that is happening at very fast timescales within the soil, based on the temperature, based on the weather, based on the moisture in the atmosphere, moisture in the soil, the plant growth, the root structures, residues in the soil. It's very complex, and there is no end to the level of detail that you can go into to describe this process in the soil, especially if you're, do you want to do it at the field scale? Do you want to do it at the subfield scale? There's many different ways to do it. And you have to make some decisions about what level you're going to tackle this problem at. And we tackle it as follows. So we simplify it down to a model that describes the growth of the plant. And that interacts with the hydrology in the soil, which interacts with the temperature of the soil, which interacts with the soil nutrients, which interacts with the weather that's happening above the surface of the earth. And each component here is a complicated model in its own right, and there's many different parameters that need to be calibrated and set. And when you string them all together and connect them up, if everything's working appropriately, and if you've got good ground truth information, you can get this model to work and give good insights to the grower. And that is the model I showed you when we did the demo earlier. Now, when you have a model, it changes the state of the art, basically. It changes the conversation around what's happening in the soil. And something very unusual happened this year in this particular season, because we had the wettest and warmest December on record in the Midwest since records began. The numbers in these pictures indicate the number of years you have to go back to find a wetter year, 121 years, which is actually as far back as records go. And on the right-hand side, it's to do with the temperature. And again, the wettest, the warmest December in many of the states that we have sell our products. And growers are concerned, is this going to affect the nitrogen I've put out into the field? This is so far outside anybody's experience in this part of the world. People didn't really know what to say, but agronomists were saying, no, don't worry about it. Some people were saying, yes, you should worry about it. And then some people were seeing those kind of profiles of nitrogen through time where all of the nitrogen was lost. And so is it a problem with our model extrapolating to a scenario that has not occurred, or is there something really there? And in the absence of that model, in the absence of that trajectory, there really isn't a lot of conversation around it. But when you have that trajectory, it really starts the conversation. And it prompts people to get out into the field and take soil samples and take measurements of the nitrate to see, is it actually gone, or is the model wrong, or is there actually something there? And what we realized is that there actually was a problem in some types of soils in regions that had very heavy rainfall. And there was one storm event in particular that went across the Midwest. You can see two very strong bands of rainfall passing from the southwest through to the northeast. And in those regions, there was a huge hit to the nitrogen and potentially a massive risk to the yield in those locations in the country. And so I guess the point here is having a model in place opens up an opportunity to communicate with the grower and to educate the grower and to learn more about the model itself as well. The model might not have been perfect, but we can certainly make it better. And it just changes the game, changes the conversation, and it provides an interesting way to think about digital agriculture. Ultimately, what we're trying to do in digital agriculture is fit this model here. There is some model that describes yield, and it's some function of the genetics of the crop that you've planted, the environment you've planted it in, and the management practices you are employing on that field. And these models have to be statistical in nature because we know about data quality. We know some pieces of information are extremely accurate and extremely important to this particular process. Some things may not be. And if it's not a statistical model, you can't really, tell the model what is the right way to capture that value, right? A statistical model is the way to do that. And if we can fit this kind of model, we can basically say to a grower, okay, if you're planting this particular hybrid of corn in this environment, well, this is the management practice you need to employ to maximize yield. Or if this is the equipment you have for managing a field, and this is your environment, well, this is the particular hybrid you should pick, right? There's different ways you can look at it. This is the digital agriculture challenge, and it is a challenge, right? And if it was easy, it wouldn't be much fun, but this is where the fun is, basically. Let's just revisit this slide here, because this really demonstrates what we can offer to growers in a place like the Midwest of the US, where there's a lot of information available to us to support this product, where there's a concentration of growers with one or two crops that they're interested in, and there's a concentration of the kinds of equipment people use and the kinds of management practices that they employ. As we look to expand climate internationally, also domestically in the US to new crops, to wheat and to canola and rapeseed and so forth, we need to do and undergo a process of market discovery and exploration to understand, do we have what we need to make this kind of expansion? And when we look here to Australia, these questions all come to mind. And the big questions here are the availability of soils information, the availability of the weather information also, at the right resolution in the regions that you're interested in. The other issue is, what is the right crop here in the in Australia to expand into, for example, and what scope is there for that particular crop to provide added value to growers, and if there is that scope, what appetite is there among growers to actually pay for a service that would potentially add value as well? These are issues that really matter. And then there's also the technical issues, of course, of how do you provide a cloud-based service in a location where you do not have the connectivity. And again, these are sentiments that were echoed again and again in the talks today. And that connectivity issue does come up in the US also, but not so much in the Corn Belt, but to the west of it, where the population starts to drop off. And we do have some functionality in place that will allow a grower to interact with the system, and then as soon as he's back and within range, it will sync and connect and share the data accordingly. We are undergoing a process of evaluating what we can do here in Australia. We have one partner that we're working with here in Victoria. He has one of these units that's hooked up to his system. He This is a map of an as-planted seeding map for wheat field, for a wheat field that he has. I asked him if I could share this with you all just to highlight that we are here in Australia already, but we are looking to add partners to test our systems next year and the year after, and we'll see what will happen after that, I guess. So I'll cut it off there. We offer a single digital platform that we're trying to address all the growers' needs from. We provide field-level weather information. We give them some models to describe key components of their operation. We give them some in-season imagery to help them manage their fields. And through all of these, we're really trying to give them that agronomic insight to improve the productivity of their operations. I'll leave it there. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, David. And I know David will take some questions. I'm going to start. You mentioned the soil data and the weather data as critical underpinning bits of infrastructure almost to those sort of models. Do you think, from what you've understood about Australia, do you think that's a killer limiting factor, or do you think it's something that is workable in terms of what might be possible here?
Great question. So let me talk first about the US, right? So in the US we have this thing called SERGO, which is what underpins a lot of what we do at the moment, and it's a federal funded data set. It's available for the whole country, and it wasn't just collected for agriculture. It was collected for other purposes like road building and construction, and it characterizes a lot of what underpins what's going on in the soil. And depending on where you are in the country, it was collected 60 years ago or 50 years ago, or it was collected 5 years ago. And there is, it's both a boon for us because it does give you that coverage, but it's also a curse because it's this flagship product, but it could be improved, and I think there's a reluctance to improve it because it would mean changing a lot of what's in it already, right? Here in Australia, we do have maps, and I was involved in some of this work with Mike Grundy and others, at a 90-meter resolution across the country. We would have to be finer resolution than that, and it's not clear if we would just rather have maps of soil types themselves or the actual maps of the soil properties. My preference would be the properties, but you'd need that at a finer resolution to take some of our work and put it out into Australia like it is in the US. But the soils are very different here anyway, so you just couldn't turn on climate field view in Australia and expect it to work either. So.
And the rainfall or the climate data?
I'm not up to speed with the resolution of that information here, but I think we can work at 4-kilometer resolution in the US, so it would have to be something comparable to that.
I think there's a bit bigger gap here.
Okay, right.
Anyone else with questions? Dave? There's one there.
G'day, David. Fred here, speaking from Queensland Department of Ag. How would you see a platform such as yours working in a situation such as the cane regions in Queensland? We've got a particular challenge around, say, nitrogen and insecticides with a public-private interest. So it's a slightly different twist to the application that you're using it now.
Okay. What's the problem?
Runoff, basically.
Runoff, yeah, okay.
It's
right.
called the reefer.
Yes, always a problem. Yeah, I mean, Nitrogen Advisor at the moment does not look at lateral flows on the surface. That's something that we're looking into, I guess, and if you're really concerned about modeling that runoff and quantifying the amount of runoff, then it would need a few iterations on what's available at the moment. There is a simmering fear in the US that regulation on fertilizer application is going to come in at some point, and it's not clear which side of that, if it does happen, do we want to be on the side that's part of regulation, or do we want to be on the side of supporting the grower? But it's an issue that's on people's minds as well in the US. So.
David, it's really a point of clarification. I'm a Queenslander,
yep.
and that question sort of raised my query a bit. You talked about statistical models, your yield as a function of.
Yeah.
That requires a lot of data. There's another pathway, biophysical models, which also requires a lot of data, but you can get away without it if you're bold. Would you like to comment on that challenge?
Yes, so you do require some information, but information can be incorporated into a model in many different ways, right? So it can be measurements at the location where you're running the model, or it could be expert opinion on what's going on, or if you can't quantify exactly what's going on, can you put a distribution on what's going on different parameters in the model? So it's not an issue of measurement or models, it's how do you combine them both? You need both, and there's an art, I guess, to finding out or figuring out what's the appropriate measurement to take, what's the important one, how many to take, where to take them, and when to take them. And with something as complicated as nitrogen dynamics, it is complicated. You do need measurements across space. You do need measurements through time, and yeah, there's no easy answer to that one, I think, but it's not all about the measurements. There are other ways to build that into the modeling.
David, one of the interesting questions, I think, is the price points for these sort of products in the US seem to be that sort of $3 to $5 an acre, and you would assume from that the growers or their advisors perceive advantages above and beyond that, knowing the way that farmers work.
Yeah.
Do you have any sense of what sort of gains, and I know it's a difficult question, but do you have any sense of what sort of gains are available to growers using, the digital information and the platforms rather than their previous management systems?
So we run field trials to evaluate the effect of implementing your plans through our platform, to evaluate what boost in yield people can get. But to actually ascribe that boost to our, the intervention of our systems versus just the weather was so much better and we got so much more yield, to disentangle the two is very difficult. And we have 5 research farms where we can do very detailed experimentation, and then we work with a whole network of research partners, and we can get insights and information from them as well. And so, we can tap into different sources of information, but still there's just so much variability around the actual performance of agricultural products that to tease apart how much is due to the platform, how much is due to weather is really difficult. So we don't make any claims at the moment about what the value is, but people are buying it at that $3 to $5 per acre price at the moment, so that's a good sign for us. But for those of you who aren't familiar with the cost of doing agriculture, just to put that into context, a grower is spending about $100 per acre on seed. He's spending about $200 per acre on fertilizer. So spending $3 to $5 per acre on a digital platform is a minor. It's still big farms, big amount of money, but minor comparison to those other 2 big inputs that they have. Ross.
David, well, you know who I am, but most people don't. Ross Searle from Ciro in Brisbane. Just on building on Mick's point there, there's anecdotal evidence in Australia from various service providers similar to yours that producers might subscribe for a few years to such a service and then bail out once they get the insights that it is able to provide. Given the short time span of Climate Corp thus far, is that an issue that you're thinking about or dealing with?
Yeah, I mean, it is, right? But we want to get growers into our system. We want them to see the value of it. We want them to understand they really need it, and we want them to continue using it. And by making functionality available that is very timely and very relevant to the current season is how we hope to keep them in our system. So giving them that imagery of the field through the season is very important. In terms of making a variable rate script, for example, you could make that and then you could implement the same script again the following year. No need to come back to the platform, I guess, if you really didn't want to. But one of the features that's going to come in the future is a seed advisor that's going to make recommendations about what particular hybrid to plant in an environment. And the way corn breeding works is there are always new lines of corn being released every single year. And so if you're not in the system, you're going to miss out at some point, I guess, as well. So that's another point.
Thanks for the presentation, David. My name's Robbie Sefton. I'm really interested in the adoption that you've had from your farmers, and your presentation really demonstrates, well, it sounds like to me that so many farmers are already on board, and it seems to be like a normal state of play. Yet in Australia it's so new, and we haven't got a lot of software programs or platforms yet that many farmers are using. And if they are using them, it's those innovators and early adopters that are. So I'm really interested in what the difference is, based on your background here in Australia and your knowledge of the Australian sector, what the difference is with that American sector and our Australian sector, and then what are the drivers that encourage adoption? Easy question.
Yeah, I don't know. I honestly couldn't speak to the differences in uptake of these systems. I was doing very different research when I was here, in fact. So I don't really have an answer to your first question. But, you know, what's driving the uptake, I think, in the US? I think, you know, we built on the information that's available, and we give them functionality that they can use right now and they can see value in right now, and I think that's driving some of the uptake. We're on track to have 12 million acres covered this season, and you know, that is the early adopters. It is the progressive farmers. It's the farmers with the latest and greatest equipment. To get that next batch of farmers is going to take considerable amount of work, I think, to try and convince them to give it a go. And we try and incentivize them to do that. We give them offers to, you know, have 100 acres for free just to see it and test it out, and then we'll call them up and say, do you want another 100? And but yeah, I mean, it's challenging to build that adoption. Yeah. Hi, Mike.
Hello, David. Welcome back.
Thank you.
Mike Grundy from CSIRO. My question's about the breadth of coverage.
Yep.
What you've described for us is that broad swathe of the best farming country in the world, which is growing corn in the US.
Yeah.
And you have therefore the tools of your trade, which is this enormous capacity for enormous amounts of data.
Yeah.
Are you interested? To what extent is Climate Corp interested in moving into other crops, other cropping systems? At what point do you not get interested? Do you do viticulture? Do you do horticulture, etc.? And or is that something for the future?
It's something for the future. We are always expanding the footprint that we are servicing. So we've been in the market for 3 or 4 years now, and what's supported is growing each year. And this year we've gone south down the delta of the Mississippi and a little bit further north and a little bit to the east. Corn, soybeans are covered. We're looking into wheat. We're looking into other things. And you know, there's 2 prongs to the strategy. We're trying to grow the geographic footprint to have access to more growers, and we're also trying to improve the value that we're giving growers and the features we're giving growers in the footprint that we're already covering. And so we're trying to basically attract a larger footprint and then charge people more for it based on the additional value we're giving them and the additional functionality as well. So there's kind of two directions we're growing the business this year.
Darren Lee here from Western Australia. I was lucky enough to be in the US earlier in the year and wanted to see where we were positioned as far as digital agriculture in the US and to us.
Yep.
And one of the big aspects I saw over there that we don't have in Australia as a whole, and I know from an input perspective it costs our group, or ourselves, our family, $1 million to put a crop in each year. In the US they have multi-peril insurance, and a very big high percentage of growers over there are covered off on it. So if they have a failure, they can insure for that cost. And I also saw the adoption. A lot of these guys are going down that digital agriculture project. It's part of their package to have this multi-peril insurance. And a lot of the insurance companies are piggybacking onto the stuff that you're doing to keep an eye on what's actually happening. Just wondered if you'd like to comment on that. Yeah, I don't know. So we were in the insurance company. We were the vendor of that multi-peril insurance for a number of years, in fact. So that might be where the connection came about. But we sold the insurance business earlier this year, and
we try and reach our growers in other ways now through the Monsanto's sales network, for example.
It's on. Yeah, sorry. Digital disruption in agriculture. I'm interested. You touched briefly on the idea that the service might extend to seed selection.
Yeah.
Farmers Business Network recently started actually offering seed sales. And I mean, that's a true disruption.
Yeah.
Would you care to make a comment? I mean, we still have, however many chairs there are at the table, but a certain number of ag chem companies, a certain number of seed companies, but the digital technology is here. The information that you have access to truly puts you or somebody like Climate, maybe not you guys because of the Monsanto relationship, but talk a little bit about the true disruptive ability of digital technology to completely change the supply chain of how seed and chemical is distributed.
So, what to say here? We are going to be making recommendations for growers down the track, and being owned by Monsanto, it kind of puts us in a funny position because we want to be brand agnostic when we make recommendations. So if there's a pioneer product that is killing it, we want to be open with our growers about recommending that to them, and that ruffles feathers in Monsanto a little bit because the seed is king. But our counter to that issue and why it's going to be fine to do that is if we're not making those kind of recommendations, someone else will. And we're not just a marketing tool for the seed. We are the future for Monsanto. We are the digital platform. And Monsanto has stated it wants to be a data science and a data service industry more so than a seed company. So if we don't do it, we lose trust with the growers, and then that's a terrible thing. So we are going to be using as much information as we can to make those recommendations, but because we're owned by Monsanto, we have a lot more information about the Monsanto product, so it's easier to make those recommendations for that kind of seed. So it's this kind of trade-off we're always making about how close are we to Monsanto versus other suppliers of seed.
Do you see there being a possibility for somebody completely new to emerge, like not to focus on them, but how big could Farmers Business Network become, or somebody like them, like a completely new digital?
Yeah, I mean, there's plenty of scope for innovation in the digital agriculture space, and we're focused on what we're doing right now. Other people are doing other things, and we kind of hear a little bit about what they're doing, but we're ignoring it, and we're just charging really hard, and just trying to do the best work we can at the moment. But yeah, something could pop up on for irrigation, or something could pop up for other crops. Who knows, right?
Richard Shepherd here from Herd Health in Victoria. Your predictive equations, they obviously work on an average, and you get a variation in results. Have you found situations where you've had exceptional responses, especially on the positive side, that have been investigated, that have led to advances in knowledge about the biology that's going on in the position?
I can't think of any examples off the top of my head. There's a lot of anecdotes in agriculture about what's driving performance, and the plural of anecdote is data. And when you try and explore the data sets to see is this particular anecdote present in more than one or two isolated locations, often they fall apart or they fall out. We haven't picked out anything in our models that farmers don't already know, and I think to get to that point, we would require different kinds of measurements, a more intensive kind of measurements, to really understand things above and beyond what the rules of thumb are that people have in place at the moment.
Question. You can speak up.
Great question. I'm not sure about herbicide. I've never touched anything to do with herbicides from Monsanto at all. But when Monsanto releases a new hybrid of corn, for example, it has gone through a series of years of field trials, and there's already an understanding about where it's going to work and how well it's going to work in different environments. And we tap into that information ourselves. And so when it comes fresh onto the market, it's not with no data. We have some idea about the performance of it, and that's why we know more about the Monsanto crops in the first place. So that's how we plan to make recommendations for those types of products. But herbicides, I've no idea at this point. So.
Okay. Just a final question,
Yep.
David, and it strikes you that as a system or a platform like this develops use and users, then the richness of the information it contains and that can be derived from analytical work on that escalates as well. So,
Yeah.
so it almost becomes a snowball in reverse, doesn't it? It's almost as if as the users multiply, the insights and the ability to derive better algorithms and better fit grow. So it's almost like a race, isn't it? The first player that gets to that position is in a very strong position.
That's a very good insight, and we try to incentivize growers to share their data with us. If they share more data with us, we can give them better feedback about what to do in their fields. And of course, the more people that share, the more we'll be able to improve that modelling and return greater value to the grower. And so there's this exponential growth, hopefully, in how well we're doing and how big we're going to sell it. Yeah, the more information we have available to us, the better we can do, for sure.